Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for attending this webinar this morning. I see there's quite a bit of activity, still people popping up to the webinar and joining us. I'm literally going to give a minute or two before we get going. As you'll notice there on the screen, we will be sharing this recorded webinar afterwards, so you should get a post-webinar survey, and attached to that or at the back of that is the recorded webinar, which you are welcome to share with your colleagues or save for later. Hopefully there's some good value you pick out of this today and some reference points for later as to how you move forward on your journey. Okay, I'm going to get going. I hope that my voice is coming through nice and clear for all the rest of you. Thank you very much once again for joining our webinar this morning. For those of you that haven't met me, my name is Guy Jelley. I'm the CEO of Project Portfolio Office and have been fortunate enough to help numerous organizations over the last 15 to 20 years in the project portfolio management space, but have done a significant amount of work on the resource management capability with a number of organizations over the last 3 years. And I wanted to share some of those learnings with everybody today. There's a lot of Project Portfolio Office users and clients on the webinar, so firstly, I thank you for joining us. But then there's a lot of non-PO people attending this morning as well, and once again, I just want to make clear that this is a webinar talking about the principles around how I believe you can go about incredible resource management capability, not related to the software. So while you may have a PPM tool in place, you may be using PPO, all the principles and the steps that I'm going to cover today I've seen and I've actually done myself with organizations using Excel. So you don't need a PPM tool, you don't need to be a PPO user. There are some screenshots of how it's done in PPO, but if you've got nothing in place and you're comfortable to start using Excel, I hope that from today you will learn some good process and some good lessons and be able to apply it. This is the second of a series of webinars that we are running and will run for the future. So hopefully you found some good value today and you join us for future ones as well. For those of you returning from the previous one, thank you very much for coming back. We do appreciate it. Hopefully today you get as much value from today's webinar as you did from the previous one. Really what I want to cover is this whole problem with resource capacity planning, resource utilization. And I always put this up when I do workshops and presentations with organizations or clients around resource management. You start taking on projects, you start managing more and more projects within the portfolio, and very quickly you get to a point where everybody knows everybody's overcapacitated, there's way too much work going on, and you sort of dawn on the fact that you need to already be looking at resource management. Resource management it's a bit chicken and egg. It's one of those difficult processes to implement. It's one of those difficult disciplines and things to get working within an organization. So you need a level of maturity before you should really start embarking on it. But one of those things that you need to do very quickly as well. So a bit of a chicken and egg. Do you wait for a certain level of maturity within your organization before you embark on resource management? The reality is probably not. You probably already have to start embracing it and working on it. And hopefully today I'm going to tell you a simple way in which you can start the journey. I know a lot of you are potentially thinking about maybe starting and not really sure how, so I will solve that for you. So before I jump into the webinar, just a question from my side to get a sense of the audience. What's the status of your resource capacity planning currently within your organization? A, currently doing it and it's working well. B, currently doing it with some challenge. C, starting with the journey. And B, not doing it but plan to start soon, or E, not doing it and no plan to start. So I'm just going to let you guys comment on this. There is a chat functionality, so at the bottom of your webinar screen there's a little person icon. If you click on that, you'll see that you can see the other participants, and there's a chat option, and you can go into the chat option and you can just write over there. You're also more than welcome to myself or my team during the webinar. I'm probably not going to be able to pick up too much of the chats myself, but my team will definitely pick it up, and anything you post over there from a question point of view I'll address as well at the end. We do a section on questions at the end. Okay, so I don't see any A's yet. I see quite a couple of B's, so at least some of you have started with some challenges, a couple of C's. That's good. Hopefully today's webinar can help you. See somebody over here as somebody says, they started, got a B, aborted, and went back to a C. So yeah, I've seen that before, unfortunately, too, as well. It's not something easy to do, I'm going to lie to you. It's something difficult to get back in. But hopefully, if you follow the simple process that I've developed for you guys today, you'll start to get some benefit. Okay, the D's there as well, no E's. So none of the A's and E's, quite a couple of C's and quite a couple of D's. Okay, so it's what I typically see. Organizations don't typically embark on this quickly, but it's a lot of organizations that we're working with and have helped recently have to start working with this. It's quite interesting. We've got an organization we're about to start working with who's just doing resource capacity planning. So they've forgone anything else in the project portfolio management space, and they're really just trying to get a handle on this. So that's the key thing that's driving their PMO at this stage. Okay, for the sake of today's webinar, resource management is really, in my mind, two different components. Resource capacity planning, which is the practice and discipline of identifying, allocating, and resourcing the required resources on a project. And then resource utilization, which is the practice of recording the actual time spent by resources on activities. So I see the resource capacity planning as the forward-looking, the to-be picture, what our resources are planned to work on, so the plan view. And then resource utilization is the actual view, the backward, what did we spend time on. And really, you'll have to determine within your organization, do you need to do resource capacity planning? Do you need to do utilization? Do you need to do both? And where are the touch points and the values for you? Resource utilization, unfortunately, has some element of timesheets, which is always a difficult subject to broach. Resource capacity planning, more forward-looking, in my mind, where most organizations start and where most of the pain initially sits. But we'll cover both in terms of the symptoms, and then you can make a decision as to what you need to do. There are organizations that do straight resource utilization and don't worry too much about the capacity planning, but that is quite rare. So some case studies on organizations that I've had the privilege to work with. I've done this with a number of organizations in the last 3 years, but I think the last 18 months I've spent significant time refining the process that we've to a point where I'm comfortable to host this webinar today and share it with you. The steps that I'm going to show you have changed over time as and how I've refined it and learned some odd lessons in the process. But from a case study point of view, I had the pleasure of working with a global e-commerce solution provider who implement their platform into some of the big Fortune 500 organizations. And really the drivers for them and what they were trying to achieve was a greater transparency around the value and the cost of the project, trying to improve the client-facing performance, project performance. So there was this perception that they were always late and performing and stuff was taking time. Because they service two organizations, there was a lot of focus on the actual effort spent on the customer account. But the key thing was really a future resource demand. So because they implement their platform and their platform has a certain number of modules and certain types of implementations, they really have a defined set of modules and project types. And if they could get to a better resource planning and then ultimately utilization, and the plan time and the actual time, they could craft a more predictable forecasting model going forward based on their sales pipeline of what the resource demand actually was. And that was key to them, and that's really where the value sat. The end result over here was actually pushing back into the sales pipeline and sales channel around what the teams were actually selling from a duration and effort point of view. Demand team within the 10th largest bottle worldwide, a beverage company. And the key here was a very small, lean team that sat within the demand area, architects, systems owners, process owners, a big bunch of resources that were flexed in as and how work required, project managers, business analysts, developers, those type of things. But really they had a key critical component skills that they needed to manage. So the prioritization of the project, the activation, and more importantly, the sequencing was key. The journey we did with them got to a point where they had to actually reprioritize their projects based on the over-allocation to a point where there was a more evenly spread priority and sequencing of their projects, such that lean team that they had and those key critical resources were actually rolling from one project to the next, but not causing bottlenecks in the process. And then a financial services company, high maturity, have a bunch of resources in the PMO, and the PMO recovers those resources time from project managers to business analysts to scrum masters to system analysts and those type of things. And really the key here was to understand the resource commitment throughout the year. They had a fairly strong portfolio management process, so had done their portfolio management process to find their business cases, approved their portfolio for the new financial year. But as soon as the new financial year started, the CFO and the CIO and everybody else wanted all their projects to immediately kick off. And of course, it was impractical for all those projects to kick off at the same time and create a bottleneck. So they really used the resource capacity management and planning side of it to create a communication expectation tool to explain to the exco and the stakeholders of how they were going to approach this portfolio and how the work would flow during the year. So more expectation management as opposed to actual resource planning, but it ensured that there was a full understanding of the resource commitment across the year, both the business resources and the PMO resources, but strongly used as a communication tool, which actually worked very well and created ultimately the end goal of having a PMO that was seen as more valuable and not a PMO that was just constant sort of backtracking and not moving fast enough, or in the view of the executives, not agile enough to do the stuff or move fast enough that they needed to. There's various reasons other organizations have done it. I haven't covered all of them. Cost recovery of the project managers is one. Capitalization of resource costs, so the CFO needing to actually have all the evidence around the capitalization of the time spent on projects. And then a lot more organizations I'm working with and seeing have a flexible resourcing and outsourcing partners. So, being able to bring resources in as required, but in order to do that efficiently and effectively and to not hold up delivery, you actually need a process where you have a clear understanding of what resources are required when and what skill. So if you don't do that very well, it doesn't help you have a great resource flexing outsource model if you're not providing your partners with the information they need to be sourcing their resources at the right time. So worked with an organization that needed to get that right as well. So the journey I'm going to take you through today, and be under no illusion it's a journey, are these 6 steps. I think once you've done steps 1 and 2, then from 3, 4, 5, and 6, they typically iterate. So you'll go from 1 to 6, and then you'll find yourself back probably at 3, improving 4, 5, 6, and then sort of iterating 3 through. So it is a journey. It's not a once-off exercise that you do and it's done. It's something you're going to build into your PMO and do on an ongoing basis. But really all I'm hoping to do is take you from where you haven't started or not sure what to do to something that's starting to work and add some value, and then you can iterate through as in how you mature. And at least it also sort of addresses the agility and creating a minimal viable product and getting something out there to start the discussion. I alluded to it in the past. I used to do the process earlier on, but I've bumped my head a number of times with business units and departments within the organizations that I helped, not really understanding why this was important, why it's needed, why we needed to do it. So it's something that I figured over time that actually doing the process at the bottom helped, and the following this order. So I'll take you through the order. These 6 steps hopefully will help guide you through the processes that we've been able to do with clients. Okay, one of the key things I think is really understanding why you're doing it and what the pains are. I find a lot of organizations that have started doing this, and they've created monster processes, spreadsheets, and a whole bunch of stuff. And when I sat them down and said, okay, well, what was the trigger point to start this? Why did you start? They looked at me almost like, well, we need to be doing resource capacity management. It's part of PMBOK or Prince 2 or one of the knowledge areas. But there was no real trigger and therefore no clear, coherent understanding of why it was important to do. So when a client of mine approaches me and says they need help with this, I challenge them, and I'm that horrible consultant that asks them the why question 5 times. But we really need to understand why we're doing this. If we understand that and we've recorded it and we've written it out and put it into our project mandate and mission and written it on our whiteboard, we can maintain that clarity of focus through the process, because believe you me, and you'll see it in the presentation, to stumble into a whole bunch of other things that need to be addressed and fixed, but you need to maintain your focus around why you started this journey and what you're trying to achieve. If you don't, those other things are just going to defocus you, and getting some sort of traction within the first 30 days is something you're not going to be able to achieve. So probably the number one thing is projects that are delayed, and when you try and understand why, it's because key resources are not available or resources are overcapacitated. So if you keep seeing that, there's a potential that you need to start looking at the resource capacity planning. Resources moving between projects irrespective of the priorities. So project managers fighting for a resource, securing a resource, and the next week that resource being redeployed somewhere else based on something else, and having to refight for those resources. Some key resources always working long hours, always overcapacitated, always running behind. And then worse, other resources that constantly seem to be available, yet for whatever reason are not fully utilized. The number one reason that most organizations phone me is firefighting and missing the project deadline. So, a constant reactive process where we fight fires, deadlines are being missed, PMOs under pressure because things are not happening fast enough, business sponsors are not happy. And really, it's never a result of a project manager who doesn't want to get a milestone achieved or a project team that's not working or focused on their goals. It's typically some other problem that's causing that, and you can very quickly, in most cases, tie it down to lack of resource capacity planning, which is the symptom. And if you don't address that, you're always going to firefight, and you're always going to be missing deadlines, and there's always going to be this perception created of underperformance. One of the things that astounds me, where organizations have in-flight projects active in their portfolio, but they're still recruiting for vacant positions. I've actually had project managers tell me that I needed a DBA, he should have started a month ago, he needs to be at 8 days a week until the end of the year. But this project is active, it's in flight, you've gone through planning, you should have secured all your resources. Why are we still trying to recruit for the necessary roles that we should have had? It's again a direct impact of the lack of proper resource capacity planning. No insight to contract requirements. I mean, I see this quite a couple of times. We have all these great partnerships with companies that can flex our resources and bring in the skills when we need it. We just only figure out we need them a week after we knew we needed it. So because we don't have that because we have that lack of visibility, it's quite difficult to know in advance when we need them. And then probably the most important thing, and where I try and focus a lot of my attention and time when I do engage with a client, is the lack of visibility. So they know there's a problem with resource capacity or utilization or both. They know it's something that is holding up projects, causing frustration, resulting in lack of delivery, performance, all those horrible things, increased customer experience, but don't really have any credible information or visibility of it, so can't really start to address it. It's just this big black hole that's keeping them awake at night. So once you've asked yourself these questions, and these are the most common ones I've run across, I'm sure there may be some others in your organization, you will be in the position where you've actually identified if your organization should be addressing this and why. And as I said before, write that why on your whiteboard behind your desk as big as you can, because it's important that we keep the focus during this journey. Other stuff will try and distract us. We have to keep our focus on why we're doing this. Resource utilization, once again, before you jump into it, ask yourself the question, do I need to be doing it? Should I be addressing it? Do you need to get a better understanding of the productivity of project resources? If you're an organization selling your services, whether internal to your organization or external to customers, do you feel there's a productivity of the project resources that's a problem? Do you not have enough information to understand how long certain activities actually take? So we keep planning for these things and we keep budgeting for these things, but they just seem to take for significantly longer. But we were supposed to be getting off our jobs seem to be diminishing and decreasing. And then, no insight into which activities are consuming the most amount of time. So I often have clients phone me and say, well, I'm making no profit on my projects. And when we try and understand which activities or which deliverables within projects are the ones that are causing the profit to dissipate, we don't have the necessary information into that, so we can't actually see where the pains are, and that leads to understanding where resource utilization is something we need to challenge. Billing discrepancies, if you're selling your projects and doing internal journals or invoicing. And then what a lot of project managers battle with is understanding the true resource cost as it happens. In an environment where resource cost is being added to a project, you don't want to be in 2019 in a situation where 6 weeks after the month is closed out, seeing the actual labor cost of your project coming through onto your project. You've progressed 12% for that month, but you've inherited 20% of the project budget in internal costs, and you can't sort of do burn down rates, and it's going to cause problems in terms of, well, I'm seeing this lag so late and I'm able to track progress against effort on an ongoing basis. I can't actually manage it. By the time I know about it, it's too late. So any one of those reasons, you probably need to start addressing resource utilization. So once again, once you've done that, you're in a position to know whether resource utilization is something you need to be focusing on, and more importantly, why you need to be focusing on it. Number 2 is finding the work type, and I think people underestimate the amount of work and stuff that people have on their plates. So what I've always said to clients is, once we know why we need to do it, let's go and look at what the work types are. Resources are very rarely dedicated to projects. In most cases, you might have a project manager that's dedicated to projects, and that's great, but those are not your key bottlenecks. It's your system owners, your business owners, your process owners, your key management team. If you've got IT projects, it's your architects, it's your security people. If you're in operations, it's your process engineers and those type of people. And you really need to get a handle on what the split is of project work versus non-project work. So in all the work I've done, we've come up with sort of 3 very high-level work types: project work, operational work or business as usual, and then overhead work. Don't be tempted when you're trying to define these work types, get too complicated and too much detail. I had a client that took overhead work and then created one for leave and one for training and one for internal management, and then leave they split into sick leave, annual leave, paternity leave, maternity leave, study leave, and I said to them, really, we don't need that amount of information at this point in time. We're starting with nothing. Let's just keep it very high level and say we have project work, operational work, and overhead work. I would forgo, if you can, the overhead work and focus on project and operational, and only really increase overhead work if you needed to. Once again, it's just an increase of complexity that you probably don't need to deal with in iteration 1 of the process. If you're not sure or you're battling to convince people of what the work types are and you do have timesheets, it's a great way to actually quickly get it. So you can just take a snapshot of the last 6 months with the timesheet data, and you'll very quickly be able to categorize the work types. But start on a high level. I always start project work, operational work, and off we go. Simple as that. I found no reason to go any further as a starting point. As you progress it, you'll go into more detail within project work, more detail within operational work, but as a starting point, you can keep it on a fairly level. Once you've got your work type defined, it's great. We know the big buckets of work that we're going to be allocating and managing our resources against, and we can step into step number 3, which is to really focus on which are the resources we're trying to manage. There's some crowns over there on the right-hand side, and I like to refer to the golden resources. So one of the mistakes I made with client very early on was trying to manage the entire resource pool. So 200 people trying to understand exactly which person is and what he's doing. And at the end of the day, it was really only about 50 people, maybe even 40 people within that resource pool that were really the key golden resources. So don't jump into the entire resource pool. I have clients who are managing a resource pool of 500, 600 resources, doing it well, but have good processes in place, good systems in place, good discipline in place to do it. But they didn't start with 600. They started with the key golden resources, and they grew it over time. So identify the resources you want to manage. Do a simple thing of recording their names, surname details, contact details, line managers, and then spend a bit of time on the role. The role, the skill, the experience, those type of things. You can create a nice set of attributes about the resources, which will help you in the reporting going forward. You can grow the attributes over time, and you can extend it. But if you start out with a 2 or 3 key attributes, role, skill, experience, whether they're permanent or contract or those type of things, I think you're in a good starting point. But once again, don't try and do it for all resources. You'll know in your gut, you'll be able to very quickly understand and see from what's happening on the ground where the actual key bottlenecks are and which resources we need to have a better focus on when it comes to resource management. Here's a good example of some good resource attributes. We have all the resource contact details, but then we have some good classifications around what department they belong to, the location, the job title, their core skill, their skill level, their employment type, and we even go as far as looking at their charge-out rates and recovery rates and those type of things. So, the more attributes you have, the richer the data set will be. But once again, don't boil the ocean. Start simple. Make sure you focus on the right resources, and then over time you can grow it into the other areas. Find the standard working hours per day for these resources and determine how much of that is available to projects. And it sounds very simple, but this is one of the big aha moments that you'll experience in the journey, and something that happens on an ongoing basis with our clients. So it's a very simple process. Take that list of resources you've identified, let's say it's 20 of them, 40 of them, calculate their standard working hours per day. In most cases, it's a day or 7 hours a day or 7.5 hours a day. You might have 1 or 2 resources that are working half day for 4 or 3.5 hours or something like that. But literally go and calculate what is the hours that they should be working on a day, times it by the number of working days in the month, and try and create that view for the next 6 months. Then ask the simple question, how much of this time that you should be available to work is your BAU type of work or your overhead work, which is not project work? So stripping out of the capacity, the actual non-project time. And very quickly, you'll be able to calculate the total capacity hours, and because you've got the attributes, you're able to do it per role, per skill, per line manager. And it's a very, very sobering exercise when you actually understand that your resource pool of 80 people only equates to 20 FTEs to actually execute the projects. So, you know, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet like the one on the left-hand side where you've got your resources and you've got available hours and you've calculated the actual resource hours per month, or whether it's something like PPO on the right-hand side where you can actually see we only have 10 planned employees, 2,600 hours, but we already have committed over 1,000 hours to operational work. We then have a very clear view of what our capacity is to run projects. And this is normally one of the first stumbling blocks that organizations go into, is that they totally underestimate the amount of time that they actually have of resources doing operational BAU work. So there's this perception that we have significantly more time to do projects than we have, and that's part of the problem. So going through this exercise and asking this question, actually getting a number, is the first sobering step in the process where people start to actually understand why we feel overwhelmed, why these projects are constantly behind, why we can't fast enough, why we're potentially not agile enough around getting stuff done. So that's the end of step 3. You have for the first time a mathematical number that you can actually stand by that's got some credibility around how much capacity you actually have available to work on projects. Now you start the journey of actually unpacking that project portfolio. And it's a very simple process. Ask the project managers to allocate the resources to their projects. The name of the resource, the job title which you already have, and the percentage allocation that they need to spend on those projects per month. It's as simple as that. So there's our business architecture blueprint project, and we need Evelyn, who's a business analyst, for 20% of her time in August, and we need Adrian, who's a business analyst, for 50% of his time in September, and Harry, who's an architect, for 20% in November. It's actually very easy to get this information, but it does take project managers some time to get it. For those teams doing sprints, agile projects, it's actually significantly easier because the sprint is shorter. There's a lot more understanding of the allocation of the resources to the sprint or to the couple of sprints, so they can quickly produce that information. For a longer waterfall type project, or for clients in the NPD space or in the infrastructure space, you know, you've probably got a decent view of the next 3 to 6 months of what the resource allocations need to be, but thereafter it probably becomes a bit fuzzy. And that's fine. It doesn't need to be perfect. I always tell organizations, don't worry about 12 months from now or 18 months from now. If we can get an accurate view over the next 6 months, it gives us a much better understanding. We can start to drive the process, start to understand the process, start to put some things in place to improve it, and then it will get better over time. But trying to boil the ocean and doing it too far in advance is not going to give the benefit you need. Out of all the steps so far, this is the one that takes the longest time, and obviously it takes the longest time because it's dependent on the project managers providing the information, and a lot of them might not have it at hand or might not be able to produce it fairly easily, and that talks to the discipline around stakeholder management, proper project planning, those type of things. But it is something they can do and should do, and something that they can start to spend time on. Once you've done that, what we typically do is we stack that information up against the capacity. So this is really the demand that's coming in, and then you start to stack it up project for project, resource for resource, and you start to get a view. These are sort of indications of some of the outputs that would come out of PPO. I've seen organizations do this very well with spreadsheets. Spreadsheets, master spreadsheets, you need to know what you're doing, but it can be done. But really all you're trying to do is create that visibility of what the current portfolio looks like. So you will typically find, as you see in this example, the red line is the capacity line over the next month on the left-hand side, and the right-hand side over the next 6 months, and the green is where the demand is. You invariably, I find, the demand exceeds the capacity, and that's what's causing the problem and the pain, where this journey starts and why organizations reach out and phone me and ask for help. You can do in PPO and other technologies, I'm sure, and you can in Excel heat maps and those type of things where you can start to see the allocation and color it and grade it and those type of things. But really all you're trying to do over here is paint the picture of what the current portfolio demand looks like based on capacity that we have, so that you can start to have that conversation with credible information. This is another example of some of the outputs where you've stacked up per project, and you can see each project's color, and you start to get a view for what the capacity is. And I mean, what typically happens, as I said before, you can see it over there in the bottom. All the red blocks is where we run way over our capacity, 133%, 140%, 143%, and that's what's causing the pain. That's what's causing the delays. That's what's causing the dissatisfaction. That's what's causing the lack of agility and those type of things, because we've just overcapacitated them. If you haven't done resource management properly and you've just activated projects and thrown resources into it, this is the view that you're going to start to get. So at that point, you have credible information. You've gone through the process, you understand your capacity, you understand your demand, you've recorded but thrown away the time that you spend on BAU, and you've taken your portfolio and you've created a view of what it is. And really, this is where you can then move to step 5, where you need to start the resource management conversations. Very few PMOs own, or no PMOs that I know, own all the resources, and very few of them own the key golden resources. So you need to start the conversation with the business, with the areas around the resource capacity management. But I've always felt if you go in there with some proper, credible information and you can actually show them the analysis of it, you're in a very good position to have those discussions. We tried in the past create resource management forums and try and develop processes and try and get business to buy into a way of work and a process and all the rest of it. But because they didn't see the problem, because we didn't have enough data to visualize it, it was just something that they felt the PMO was doing because the PMO needed to do it. Everyone knew that people were busy and everybody knew that there was maybe too much going on, but they couldn't visualize it and see it. We knew it, we heard it, we understood it, the project managers told us about it, but we approached it correctly from a process discipline point of view, as opposed to, here's the picture, this is why it's bad, now let's work with us to fix it. So going into those conversations now, you have proper information. You know, the touch points you're going to discuss are over allocation of resources, under allocation of potential resources, vacancies that need to be filled on projects that are running, and you know, why is this not happening? Where's the bottlenecks, and how can we get these resources in fast? The percentage of resources that we've managed. Step number 3 was identifying what are the key resources. You might only start with 30% actual resources managing, but you believe that those 30% are the key ones. So keep having that conversation. We've done this for 30% of our resources, but we believe that's the bottleneck. If we can get this process working for them, we can extend it into the 40, 50, 60, 80% of the resources. But we didn't want to go to everybody as a starting point. We want to focus. Then project priorities, you know, you've stacked up those demand of the portfolio. Most organizations I work with don't have a formal prioritization process, or if they do, it's a simple model that is high, medium, low, 1, 2, 3. But you're going to start having the conversations around at what point in this demand do we have to stop? Because if we were to prioritize and stack the demand up against the priorities of the projects, it's quite clear from the data that we've seen that project priority 12 is where we hit the resource capacity constraint. So anything thereafter needs to be resequenced, pushed out, moved around, resource management, you know, resourced from other resources or whatever it may be. I've always felt at this point in time you need to go to any business forum that exists, project activation forums, investment committee forums, project review committees, exco meetings, board meetings, delivery boards, team meetings. Go to as many business forums as you can, and specifically ones that are cross-cut from different areas, and create that visibility and show them the problem. Once you start creating that visibility of the problem with real credible data, those conversations start to get the support, you start to get the buy-in, you start to get the understanding as to why these things are important. Okay, and once you've started those conversations, they can start to move forward to help addressing the problems. You know, I've asked for certain forums, certain standing agenda items at certain forums, and said, can I come back in 2 weeks' time or the next time you meet and present to you the current view and where we are and what we've done, and start to entrench myself into some of those committees and forums so that we can constantly keep this message going. As I said, it's a journey, so it's something that constantly has to be worked on, and by having an ongoing conversation at an exco, at a portfolio review committee, it starts to create that momentum that you're going to need to drive this forward and drive this journey through. Step number 6 is then when you actually start to address it. So, as I said, one of my lessons learned was trying to do process too early and creating process for the sake of processing. So what I've seen work very well in the last 18 months, maybe a year now, with some of the clients I've been engaged with, is once we've created that visibility and it's crystal clear to everybody that the demand exceeds the capacity, then we turn to each other and we say, how do we fix this? And we start to fix this by developing a simple resource allocation process. You know, who allocates the resources, who approves those resources, who makes a decision as to which projects move forward, who makes a decision as to when we activate projects. All those discussion points and decision points need to be built into the process. It might sound quite controversial for you, but I found that resources who understand their role on the project and understand what their responsibilities are and the deliverables that are assigned to them have the most accurate view of what their resource allocation should be. So even though the project manager might feel something, they've got a clear understanding of what the allocation is. So what we've done with some organizations is, now that we've created that snapshot of what the current visibility is, we allow the resources to continue to maintain that information themselves with the necessary review by the project manager and their line managers, but create an ecosystem where the real resource allocation that those resources need projects to do the work is created, it's available, it's real, it's visible, it's constantly changing, is something that creates massive value. Now, whether that's a big spreadsheet that you've got, and you've saved it on SharePoint and the people are able to download it off SharePoint and update it and maintain it and check it in and check it out, or whether it's a slick PPM tool, it doesn't matter what the technology or the platform is that you do it, but keeping that data set you've created as part of step number 4, the visibility, updated and accurate, is critically important. Because as and how you progress on this journey, you're able to maintain that view, and you will start to address the over-allocations, you'll start to address the project priorities, you'll start to address the lack of headcount potentially, and as and how you start to resolve these things and solve these problems, the view gets refined and the over-allocation will typically dissipate. So, you know, simple process, who allocates the resources, who reviews it, how do you approve it, how does it get approved, how do we review it, and those type of things. The different processes will depend a lot on who owns the resources, what the structure is, what the funding model is, whether you're in a matrix structure or those type of things. But it really is starting to create that simple process, which starts when we activate projects, starts when we allocate resources, starts when projects end and resources are disallocated and all that. Taken off the projects and those type of steps, that you start to run the process and enabling that with the technology, as I said, whether it's the Excel spreadsheet or whether it's a PPM tool, starts to create that view. But creating that process gets the buy-in from all the resources, all the line managers, all the departments, all the teams, and it starts to sort out a lot of the problems that we've created for ourselves in this over-allocation that we've created. So at that point in time, you really have a simple process which you can then start to gain traction on. And a lot of stuff is going to pop up, and I'll talk to some of this stuff shortly. But in that process, you start to create some consistent way in which this is handled, some discipline around how it's handled, some visibility as to it, and you're then able to move forward on this resource management journey as and how you progress. I'm not going to lie to you, it's difficult, it's not easy, but what you've been able to do very quickly, and what I try and tell clients is, let's do this in a month. Let's create this visibility, start the conversation, get people to understand the pain that we know exists, get them to see it, and then let's get them to help us fix it by introducing a good business process. So, you know, some of the stuff that's going to happen immediately is you're going to run into the whole thing of, well, we have project plans, and why don't we have this information available in our project plan? So I can tell you immediately, we tried to do this before. I've worked in this environment and space now for almost 20 years. You never, ever have a project manager who has a project plan which has a true reflection of timelines and milestones and commitments that have been made from a timeline point of view, as well as the full resource allocation. So trying to get that out of a schedule, trying to get a project manager to create a schedule that does all of that is something that takes a significant amount of time and maturity, and I've just found that most organizations don't have that. With the of agile and these type of things as well, you're not going to have project plans and all of these things for some of the projects. So trying to drive that out of a project plan is work. It's very sad because when we actually built PPO many years ago, we had this utopia that once the project plans were done and you imported it into PPO, you created this beautiful resource allocation model, and we actually had to roll back all that functionality because after 7 or 8 years of having it, no clients were able to actually do that. So we decoupled the resource allocation from the schedule, and while the two should talk to each other and should resemble each other, we found having different data sets actually give us the ability to ensure that our schedule, milestone, and planning is accurate, and that our resource allocation is accurate. And over time, you can see how different the two data sets are and where there's some commonality or where there's some alignment. And then the other big problem is project managers are very good at telling you that they don't know what the resource allocation is because they're still planning and they'll only have a baseline schedule at the end of planning. And that's problematic once again because it's typically those golden resources that are involved in helping you do business cases, are involved with initiation, involved with significant planning sessions. And because that's now not known or unknown according to the project managers, you now end up having these big black holes where these people disappear into, but they bottleneck resources because they're not available to do other things. So as soon as a project is activated, a project manager should have an understanding of who the resources that are going to be involved, what involvement they're going to have. Based on that, they should immediately start allocating them in terms of this is person I need for X number of time or percentage planning or business case or whatever the steps are until such time as they've got to at a formal baseline project plan. The next set of things that you're going to start to identify in the short term, which is going to come up in your discussion, so I'm making you aware of it now because it's stuff that we've seen, and maybe some of these things are discussions you've already started having, or things you know you need to be having, or you've already addressed. It's awesome, but you're going to start to identify inefficiencies. I've seen it before with organizations where we've allocated certain resources based on the planned work, and then that work just drags on and on and on, and people are really now starting to ask the question, why do these things take so long? Why does this business unit take so long to deliver? Why does something that was supposed to take a week take 4 weeks? And sometimes, unfortunately, you're going to start to identify some level of inefficiencies in some of the work being done, and you're going to start asking those questions. Prioritization is something that pops up very quickly. So even when you're stacking your demand against your capacity, people are going to say, but, well, which projects stack and which ones do I stack first? And I tell them, well, if you don't have a prioritization model, stack them all because the resources are not sure what the priorities are anyway, so they're involved and committed to all of these things. So people are then going to say, but shouldn't we prioritize? And the answer is, of course we should, but then let's talk about that. Let's have the prioritization discussion and let's talk about the portfolio and all the rest of it. That leads into the sequencing. So, okay, great, we prioritize. But if we sequence these projects better, or we start them at different points, or we activate projects as and when the capacity is available, then we have a significantly better flow of the projects, no stop-ins and bottlenecks and all the rest of it. And then what will typically happen will be a headcount discussion. Do we have enough resources for this? Most PMO managers and executives that I meet who are accountable for the PMO say that, the executives want us to execute on this portfolio of 40 projects, but we actually only have enough capacity to do probably 30. So there's really a decision point, more resources or less projects, one of the two. But that conversation will come up, it will pop up, and then you'll have to have those decisions as to how do you do this. Can you bring in more headcount? Can you not? How are these things done? I've had clients that say, well, if you need to fund these things, then the cost of these resources you need to bring in need to be part of your project budget, and they need to be part of your business case. If they're part of your business case and your business case is approved, well, then you have the resources and you can move on. As I said, some resources you can contract in and scale, some are just not scalable. And then the medium term, which you'll start to experience sort of 6 months into this journey, maybe a little bit earlier, a bit longer for some organizations, is you'll really start to improve the estimation of the true cost of the projects and the work estimation. So people, unfortunately, totally underestimate how long it takes things. I still have people in my team that tell me, don't worry, this is only going to take an hour or 2 hours. And tell people nothing in this world takes an hour anymore. Nothing takes 2 hours. So over time, because you've done the allocation and because you've actually run the project and you've seen how long these things take and should take, you start to get a much better view of what the estimations are. And people will start to better estimate, which will only help you going forward in terms of proper resource allocation. If you do timesheets, of course, you can see the actual time spent and you start to see plan versus actual, and then you can really start to deliver some value in terms of how long these activities actually take. Even without the timesheets, just the duration that these things take and the updates that you get and the updates on the resource allocation that happens as and how you're moving, you'll start to get a sense of some of the things and where the estimations were poor. And then ultimately improved service delivery. I've had customers that have turned around to me a year later and said, I battled for so long to explain to people the problem. Once we went through this process and showed them the data, now when I say, can we start this project next quarter, or can we wait a bit, or can we reconsider this project, they now see it as something that's based on some credible information, and they understand why we're doing that, as opposed to the PMO don't have enough project management, or PMO don't want to move fast enough, or PMO have too much governance, or any one of these horrible things. They're now starting to understand that this is actually trying to ensure that once the project is activated and starts, that it flows through the process and doesn't hit the resource bottlenecks that was happening previously. So in conclusion, the 6 steps that I recommend you do, be very clear on what it is that you're trying to achieve and why you're trying to achieve it. If it's the resource capacity planning versus the utilization, understand why. What is it that's causing that pain and frustration, so that as we progress on this journey, we can keep reminding ourselves and keep ensuring that we stick back to that. Determine the work types. That's a key step in the process, because people will underestimate the amount of BAU time that people need to spend, and they'll consider that projects are not moving fast enough, but because the BAU time is significantly more than what they think it is. Focus on the key golden resources, get a good set of metadata related to those resources, create that current visibility. Even if it's a spreadsheet, it might be difficult, cumbersome, and a lot of data, but create that view. Go into the next steps, number 5, for the discussions with credible data showing the problem. If you've done that, the lights come on, people start to give you the focus and attention, they start to understand the challenge, they start to drill into their own resources, their team's resources, team number A's resources. Why is this team overcapacitated? Why is this resources? Looking at that, what resources that are working on my projects or other projects, immediately people start to see how that pain impacts on them and their needs and wants and projects, and that starts to have a conversation. And create that simple process of how resources are requested, allocated, and engaged, and start to drive that process. When a new project starts tomorrow, use the process to ask the question, can we start this project? What are the resources that are required? Are they available? Can we sequence this thing better? Those type of things. Ask the horrible conversation. If you want to start this project, are we happy to forgo this other project because they're using the same resources and have the same timelines and duration? So those are the steps you follow. As I said, it's a journey. You're going to get to 6, start to get some traction, start to get some order, and you're going to go back into 3, 4, 5, and 6. This creating the current visibility is an ongoing journey. It changes all the time. You need to update it as often as you can based on what's practical, depending on what the technology set you're using. But the more accurate and real time you keep that information, the more valuable it is in all the ongoing discussions. And don't fool yourself, you're going to get dragged into a lot of meetings and stuff that you didn't even know exists, because people know that you have this great data set and you can create some visibility as it. Okay, so I'm going to open up for questions now. I see there were some questions popping up on the comments during the session. I didn't get time to look at too many of them. Just before I open to Taryn and ask her for questions, there's my contact details. I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn as well. If you want to get hold of me, there's my email address. Please feel free to email me if you want to. Just a reminder, we will send out a survey after this. The recording of this webinar is available with the survey. And if there's other topics you have or other pains you have, please let us know. We have a range of these webinars we do. The next one, if you're interested, you can save the date. It's on the 3rd of October. Digitalizing our PMO. So it's a journey that we went on with a client who had a lot of spreadsheets and manual stuff. And really their whole business focus was around digitalization. And I asked them about digitalizing your PMO, because you've still got this template and this Word spreadsheet and this PowerPoint and this Word document and this Excel spreadsheet. So we actually went through a process of digitalizing their PMO to a point where we basically digitalized everything, and obviously had a massive efficiency for both the PMO and the project managers, and cleaned up a lot of data and processes as well. So great webinar there. But if there's other topics, please share them with us. We're happy to continue sharing our knowledge, and maybe it's something that we can partner on and we can deliver. So Taryn, over to you. Are there any specific questions that you'd like me to address? We probably have about another 10 minutes or so. So happy to take any questions you might have.
Yes, Guy, we have a couple of questions. The first question I've got is, how do you encourage heads of department to stop teams as fully allocated all of the time?
Yeah, so I've actually had this very recently as well. So those conversation pieces, the step number 5 where you start to create a conversation. I've learned that while you will have conversations with specific business units at their meetings and their forums and stuff, creating a view across different areas or different business units and creating conversation across is useful. One of the clients I'm currently working on has a SEF forum, Strategic Execution Forum. They've got 17 different areas represented, the 17 managers of the different areas across the entire business represented. And we chose that forum because it was the one forum that all the business units were represented, and we could create the enterprise view of the resources. And very quickly they start to ask each other the questions. It's not a PMO asking the questions or us asking the questions, it's the business units asking the questions. How is it possible that that team doesn't have capacity? How is it possible that that team wants all these projects done or need to be involved in these projects but don't seem to have the capacity? So you let the organization see the data and start asking those questions. But the other thing is it does create visibility, and the visibility is really what you're after to create the conversations. Organizations that do timesheets, you're able to actually assess the resource capacity planning based on the actual timesheets and get an accurate view and reflection. But the reality is the projects are being done for business, on behalf of business. The PMO is just a capability or a capacity that exists within the organization to drive these things forward. And if a certain business unit doesn't have the capacity to deliver on the projects, then we shouldn't be doing projects for them. The challenge is always where they need to be available to assist other departments to execute on their projects, how we secure their resources. But having that conversation across the different areas is typically a good starting point to address that. Next one, Darren.
Next one I've got here is, are there any Excel templates available for resource management?
Yeah, so I mean, we're in the fortunate position that we do this directly in our tool. We actually have organizations that have implemented PPO just to solve the problem. But there's really 2 data sets, so happy to be able to provide it to you. We can just dump extract the data set out of our tool to create an input for you. But your first data set is really your resource pool, your capacity. Who are the resources? What are their attributes? What is the standard working hours? What is the hours that are available to work on projects if you take out the BAU time? And then the second data set is your actual project resource allocation. So that's a simple data set that says project resource, start date, end date, percentage allocation. Might be one person booked full-time on a project, or somebody that works 20% one on a project, 40% months 2 and 3, and you merge those data sets together and you're able to see the capacity and the demand, and then you're able to start the view. So obviously doing it in a spreadsheet is difficult and complex. You need to have your head around the spreadsheet, but it has been done, and I've seen organizations do it well on a spreadsheet. It obviously gets to the point at some stage where they say we need to move it to something else. I'm not saying better, but something else, more sophisticated potentially. But yes, we can provide and help with that. So I'm sure Taryn will pick up your names and share something with you afterwards for that. Probably 2 more, Taryn. Yeah.
Yes. Sorry about that. We've got one from Scott. Scott is asking, how is best to calculate the utilization of the actual PMO, percentage allocation to projects running?
Okay, so Scott is somebody I actually know. Scott, utilization, obviously you're talking about the time spent. So where is the PMO spending their time? And I'm presuming, as no PMO I've ever worked in owns all the resources. You may own some of the resources. If you're a PMO in IT, you may own the project managers and developers and BAs and those things. Some PMOs, you may only own the project managers. Whether you have a large PMO, and Scott, I know in your case it's not a large PMO, having resources in the PMO, and it's probably understanding where are they spending their time, utilization being the after effect, the timesheet side. And the reality is, unfortunately, the only thing that you can do to solve this is 2 things. Have a clearly defined service catalog of what it is your PMOs offer, coaching, project review, training, remediation, project reporting, project assurance, onboarding, whatever these services are that your PMOs offer to the business and organization as well as to the project. Fortunately, looking at doing a potential timesheet for your PMO to say, okay, well, we have the service catalog, and if you're spending time coaching the project manager for project A, then, record it there. And if you're spending time doing onboarding of resources into a certain department, or if you're doing project remediation for a sponsor or owner for a certain project, or project review for a certain committee, then recording that time on a timesheet, you create the view. I've had it in the past where, I've had organizations who needed to fight for more head in their project office. And the best way to do that was to create a service catalog, identify the services that were offered, record timesheets for a period of 3 to 6 months against the projects, and then be able to show that the amount of time we spend in, is based on the following information, and being able to do that. It also does, in that case, in that example, gave us an opportunity to see some of the efficiencies. So we spent a lot of time coaching, and we were coaching individual project managers on disciplines like scheduling, as an example, on an ongoing basis. And we figured that if we spent some time actually doing some proper training of project planning and scheduling, and like the project training, as an example, across all the project managers, and most of them were accidental project managers, so project managers in business running projects, we were then able to scale some of our time as opposed to spending one-on-one time with them. So you may identify some efficiencies in that process, but unfortunately, the best way to do utilization is to create a timesheet and the data. If you can recover some of that time from the project budgets in terms of that work you do, that's also something to help your funding model around the PMOs. Okay, I think one last question, Taryn.
Okay, the last here is we currently juggle multiple spreadsheets for planning and utilization. We've been discussing tools, but unsure whether to focus on specifically resource management solutions or a broader PPM tool. What would your thoughts be?
So, I would always say go for the broader PPM tool, but with a big but. The reality is, this is a journey. It's something you're going to grow and mature, and having a broader PPM tool will help you mature and answer some of those questions that are going to pop up. Questions are going to pop up around project prioritization, around sequencing, around status reporting, and those things. I helped one organization with this, and the PMO created so much good faith and value to the organization by creating this data set that the next questions they asked was, well, give me the impact assessment of all our projects, and give me the project status and health of all these projects, and give us the benefit tracking on all these projects. So by creating some goodwill and faith in the first data set, all of a sudden other stuff that we were doing, but without the support of the business or even the interest of the business, popped up immediately, and we got the mandate and the interest, more importantly, to start producing the other data sets, which just got the PMO really going and adding the value. So I would always go with the PPM tool, but your focus. The biggest frustration and challenge and pain that I have, and where I fight with my clients, unfortunately, is where they've got a specific problem, they've identified a PPM tool to solve that problem, they've gone through the process of identifying the tool, and in that process they've seen all the fancy shiny stuff on the salesman showed them, and all the fancy shiny stuff on the product features fact sheet, and now when they implement, they don't focus on the one or two things that they were really trying to do. They now try and entrench 40 new pieces of functionality into their business because this shiny, sexy tool can do it all. So I would definitely go for the PPM tool. That gives you the ability to scale, it gives you the ability to grow. The data model you have starts to put the elements of projects, resources, portfolios, timelines, health into place, which is how you can grow and mature it. But don't get sidetracked. Don't try and activate all the features and functionality, because the number one or two problems you were trying to solve when you started the journey will be diluted because you defocused off those key things and you move to other stuff. And that is crucial to keep that view. And implementing any technology, PPM as well, is a journey. So you want to have manageable chunks, you want to claim victory, you want to add value, and then move to the next one. So if you choose a PPM tool, I recommend you do, stick with your focus so that you don't get distracted by the other functionality. Then I think you've made the right choice. Okay, anything else, Darren? Any other questions?
From my side, there's no more questions.
Okay, good stuff. So I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us today on the webinar. Hopefully you got some good value out of it. Please feel free to reach out to myself and my team. I see there are some other questions still popping up here. We will address all of those. I don't want to hold anybody up here. We'll get back to you, to some of you on those questions. You're more than welcome to reach out to me. Please feel free to do that. If you got some good value, hopefully you'll join us again 3rd of October, digitalizing our PMO, the journey that we went on with that specific client. We'll send out the survey shortly. I'm sure the ladies will get it out today. They're efficient and organized. And if you can share this recording with your colleagues or other people that you feel will get value, please feel free to do that. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope to meet up with you all at a conference or a PMO forum or at one of our future webinars. Thank you very much.